Lieutenant Sarah Chen had always been invisible in the Navy Communications Center. For 3 years, she worked the night shift, monitoring radio frequencies and decoding messages while other officers slept. Her colleagues barely knew her name, and that was exactly how she liked it. The communication hub buzzed with quiet activity that Tuesday morning. Sarah sat at her usual station, headphones around her neck, watching the coffee maker in the corner. The old machine gurgled and hissed as it brewed the thick, bitter coffee that kept the night crew awake. She had volunteered to make the morning pot for the incoming day shift, a small gesture that no one would remember. Sarah walked to the coffee station with her ceramic mug, the one her sister had given her before deployment. It was plain white with a small chip on the handle. Nothing special to anyone else, but it reminded her of home. She poured the steaming coffee slowly, watching the dark liquid fill her cup. The familiar ritual calmed her nerves after another sleepless night of monitoring enemy communications. The room hummed with the usual sounds of morning transition. Officers arrived for the day shift, chatting about weekend plans and family calls. Sarah kept to herself, as always. She had learned early in her career that being forgettable was safer than standing out. In the Navy, attention usually meant trouble. As she lifted the coffee pot to pour a second cup for her replacement, a voice cut through the morning chatter like a sword through silk. "Lieutenant Chen, report to my office immediately." Admiral Richardson stood in the doorway of the communications center. Every conversation stopped. 20 pairs of eyes turned toward Sarah, then back to the Admiral. The coffee pot trembled in her hand as she set it down on the counter. Admiral Richardson was a legend in the Pacific Fleet. He commanded 3 aircraft carriers and had served in every major conflict of the past 2 decades. Officers with 20 years of experience still nervous when they spoke his name. He never visited the communications center. He certainly never asked for junior lieutenants by name. Sarah's mind raced through every possibility. Had she made a mistake in her reports? Was there a problem with her security clearance? Her hands felt cold despite the warm coffee mug she still held. She set it down carefully, afraid her shaking fingers might drop it. "Yes, sir," she managed to say, her voice steadier than she felt. The Admiral's expression was unreadable, his gray eyes scanning the room before settling back on her. "Bring your recent intercept files. All of them from the past 72 hours. The blood drained from Sarah's face. Her intercept files contained some of the most sensitive intelligence she had ever processed. 3 days ago, she had picked up unusual radio chatter from a known hostile frequency. The messages were coded, but she had spent hours breaking down the encryption pattern. What she found inside those messages had kept her awake for 3 straight nights. Sarah gathered her files with trembling hands while the entire room watched in silence. Her colleagues, who had barely acknowledged her existence moments before, now stared as if she were a ghost. The day shift supervisor, Commander Hayes, looked confused and concerned. Even the senior analysts had stopped their morning briefings to observe. The walk to Admiral Richardson's office felt like a march to execution. Sarah's footsteps echoed in the empty corridor as she followed the Admiral's measured pace. Her mind replayed every detail of the intercepted communications, searching for any mistake she might have made in her analysis. Admiral Richardson's office was smaller than Sarah had imagined, but every inch spoke of authority and experience. Battle maps covered the walls, marked with positions of ships and aircraft across the Pacific. A photograph of the Admiral with the Joint Chiefs of Staff sat on his desk next to a worn copy of Sun Tzu's Art of War. "Close the door, Lieutenant," the Admiral said without turning around. He stood at the window, looking out at the harbor where 3 destroyers and a submarine were preparing for departure. Sarah closed the door and stood at attention. Her files clutched against her chest. The silence stretched for what felt like hours, but was probably only seconds. Finally, Admiral Richardson turned to face her. "Lieutenant Chen, you've been monitoring Sector 7 frequencies for the past 6 months. Your reports have been thorough." He paused, studying her face. "Tell me about the transmission you intercepted at 0347 hours on Sunday morning." Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs. That was the transmission that had changed everything. The one that had made her question whether she should report what she had discovered, or pretend she had never heard it. "Sir," The transmission originated from coordinates that placed it approximately 200 nautical miles southeast of our current position. The initial encryption suggested routine merchant vessel communications, but when I applied the standard decryption protocols, the message content was inconsistent with merchant traffic. Admiral Richardson nodded slowly. Continue. I ran the transmission through advanced cryptographic analysis and discovered a secondary encryption layer. The decoded message contained references to naval vessel positions, deployment schedules, and what appeared to be classified operational details about our carrier group movements. The Admiral's expression remained neutral, but Sarah noticed his fingers tap once against his leg. It was the only sign that her words had any effect on him. Who else knows about this transmission, Lieutenant? No one, sir. The discovery was made during my independent analysis, after my shift ended. I haven't filed the complete report yet, because I wanted to verify my findings before making such a serious allegation. Sarah had spent 3 days double-checking her work, hoping she was wrong. The implications of what she had found were terrifying. If her analysis was correct, someone with access to highly classified Navy communications was feeding information to hostile forces. The leak was coming from inside their own fleet. Admiral Richardson moved to his desk and sat down, gesturing for Sarah to take the chair across from him. This break in military protocol surprised her more than anything that had happened so far. Lieutenant, your academic record shows degrees in cryptography and computer science from MIT. Your performance reviews indicate exceptional analytical skills and attention to detail. But what interests me most is your psychological profile. It says you prefer to work alone and rarely seek recognition for your achievements. Sarah nodded, unsure where this conversation was heading. That combination of skills and personality makes you uniquely valuable for certain types of work. Work that requires absolute discretion and unquestioning loyalty to your country, regardless of the personal cost. The Admiral leaned forward, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. What I'm about to tell you is classified at the highest levels. The transmission you intercepted is part of a larger investigation that has been ongoing for 8 months. We believe there is a security breach somewhere in the Pacific Fleet command structure. Sarah felt the air leave her lungs. Her suspicions were not only correct but part of something much larger and more dangerous than she had imagined. Your analysis skills and your ability to remain unnoticed make you perfect for what we need. But I must warn you, Lieutenant Chen, that accepting this assignment will change your life in ways you cannot imagine. You will be asked to do things that will test every principle you hold dear. You will work alone, trust no one, and carry secrets that could destroy careers and end lives. The Admiral stood and walked to a safe hidden behind one of the battle maps. He withdrew a thick manila envelope sealed with red wax. Inside this envelope are your new orders and the complete file on Operation Silent Current. If you accept this assignment, you will report directly to me and to no one else. Your cover story will be that you are being transferred to routine intelligence analysis. Your real mission will be to identify and stop the security breach before it compromises our entire Pacific operation. Sarah stared at the envelope, her mind reeling. 20 minutes ago, she had been pouring coffee and planning to catch a few hours of sleep before her next shift. Now she was being offered a chance to become a spy hunting for traitors within her own Navy. I need to know your answer now, Lieutenant. This opportunity will not come again, and if you decline, you must never speak of this conversation to anyone. Sarah looked up at Admiral Richardson, seeing something in his eyes that she had not noticed before. Behind the stern military bearing was a man carrying enormous responsibility and making impossible choices. He was trusting her with the most dangerous mission of her career, and possibly her life. She thought about her sister back home, who believed Sarah spent her days filing reports and monitoring routine communications. She thought about her parents, who were proud their daughter was serving her country but had no idea how dangerous that service might become. She thought about the colleagues who barely knew her name but whose lives might depend on her success. I accept the assignment, sir. Admiral Richardson nodded once and handed her the envelope. The wax seal felt warm against her fingers, as if it had been recently applied. Report to Building C7 at 0600 tomorrow. Ask for Agent Martinez. She will be your handler and your only contact besides myself. From this moment forward, Lieutenant Chen, You are on your own. Building C7 looked abandoned from the outside. Sarah had walked past it dozens of times during her 3 years on base, assuming it was just another storage facility. At exactly 0600, she knocked on the unmarked door. The manila envelope tucked securely in her jacket. Agent Martinez was not what Sarah had expected. Instead of a stern military officer, she found herself facing a woman in her 30s with kind eyes and a warm smile. She wore civilian clothes and spoke with a slight accent that Sarah couldn't place. "Lieutenant Chen, welcome to the real Navy," Martinez said, leading her through a corridor that opened into a sophisticated operations center. Banks of computers lined the walls, and multiple screens displayed satellite feeds from across the Pacific. What you see here doesn't officially exist. Sarah followed Martinez to a briefing room where the walls were covered with photographs, documents, and red string connecting various pieces of information. It looked like something from a conspiracy thriller, except everything here was terrifyingly real. "The security breach you discovered is worse than we initially thought," Martinez began, pointing to a timeline on the wall. "Over the past year, we've identified 17 separate instances where classified information appeared in enemy hands, within hours of being transmitted through our secure channels." Sarah studied the timeline, noting dates and locations. "The pattern suggests someone with high-level access and real-time communication capabilities." "Exactly. Our investigation has narrowed the suspect pool to 12 officers, with the necessary clearance levels and access to the compromised information. Your job is to help us identify which one is the traitor." Martinez handed Sarah a tablet containing detailed profiles of each suspect. As she scrolled through the names and photographs, Sarah's stomach sank. These weren't faceless enemies or shadowy figures from spy novels. They were respected officers she had seen in the hallways, some she had even shared elevators with. "How am I supposed to investigate these people without arousing suspicion?" Sarah asked. "That's where your invisible status becomes an advantage," Martinez explained. "You'll be given access to the communications monitoring station during all 3 shifts. Your cover story is that you're conducting routine signal analysis for a fleet-wide security audit. No one questions extra security measures these days." Over the following weeks, Sarah fell into a routine that was both exhausting and terrifying. During the day, she attended regular briefings and maintained her normal duties to preserve her cover, but during the evening and night shifts, she began her real work. She installed monitoring software on communication terminals used by the suspect officers. She analyzed message timing and encryption patterns. She studied personnel movement logs and compared them to instances when classified information had been compromised. Slowly, a picture began to emerge. 3 of the suspects showed patterns that concerned her. Commander Phillips, who supervised the Intelligence Analysis Division, had been working unusual hours that coincided with several security breaches. Captain Rodriguez, who oversaw fleet communications, had taken 3 personal leave days that matched dates when sensitive information had leaked. But it was the 3rd suspect that truly worried Sarah. Colonel Anderson was Admiral Richardson's own chief of staff. He had access to virtually every piece of classified information that passed through fleet headquarters. His communication patterns showed encrypted personal messages sent during times that matched known security breaches. If Anderson was the traitor, he was feeding information to the enemy from the heart of Fleet Command. Sarah knew she needed proof before making any accusations. She began staying later each night, using her authorized access to monitor Anderson's communications in real time. On a Thursday evening in late October, her patience was rewarded. At 2,247 hours, Anderson sent an encrypted message from his personal communication terminal. Sarah's monitoring software captured the transmission and began automatic decryption. What she found made her blood freeze. The message contained the complete deployment schedule for a carrier task force scheduled to depart in 72 hours. It included route information, escort vessel assignments, and communication frequencies. This was exactly the kind of intelligence that could allow enemy submarines to position themselves for a devastating attack. But the message destination troubled Sarah even more than its contents. The recipient was a civilian communication relay in Singapore. known to be a hub for intelligence operations by several hostile nations. Anderson wasn't just passing along routine information. He was providing actionable intelligence that could get American sailors killed. Sarah's hands shook as she copied the intercepted message to her secure files. She had found the traitor, but now she faced an impossible dilemma. Anderson was one of the most trusted officers in the Pacific Fleet. Admiral Richardson relied on him for everything from strategic planning to daily operational decisions. Accusing him of treason would require ironclad proof and careful handling. She decided to gather more evidence before reporting her findings. Over the next week, she documented 4 additional instances where Anderson had transmitted classified information through unauthorized channels. Each transmission followed the same pattern: encrypted messages sent during off hours to the same Singapore relay station. On Halloween night, Sarah was preparing her report when her monitoring system detected something that changed everything. Anderson was sending another transmission. But this one was different. Instead of operational intelligence, he was warning his handlers about ongoing security investigations. Investigation expanding beyond original scope, the decoded message read. Suspect they may have identified communication patterns. Recommend immediate extraction if situation deteriorates further. Sarah realized with horror that Anderson knew about the investigation. He might even know about her role in it. She was no longer just a spy hunting a traitor. She had become a target. Her secure phone buzzed with a text from Martinez. Emergency meeting. Building C7. Come immediately. Sarah grabbed her evidence files and headed for the door, but stopped when she heard footsteps in the corridor outside her office. It was after midnight, and this section of the building should have been empty. She turned off the lights and waited by the door, listening. The footsteps stopped directly outside her office. Sarah held her breath as the door handle turned slowly. She pressed herself against the wall as the door opened, and a figure in military uniform stepped inside. In the dim light from the corridor, she could make out the silhouette of Colonel Anderson. He moved directly to her computer terminal and began accessing her files. Sarah watched in terror as he discovered her monitoring software and began copying her investigation records. She knew she had to get out of the building and warn Martinez, but Anderson stood between her and the only exit. She waited until he was fully focused on the computer screen, then slipped out of the office and ran toward the stairwell. Behind her, she heard Anderson curse as he discovered she was gone. His footsteps echoed in the corridor as he began pursuing her through the building. Sarah had a head start, but Anderson knew the building layout better than she did. She reached Building C7 and pounded on the door, looking over her shoulder for signs of pursuit. Martinez opened the door and immediately saw the panic in Sarah's eyes. He knows, Sarah gasped. Anderson knows about the investigation. He was in my office copying my files. Martinez pulled her inside and locked the door. How much did he see? Everything. All my evidence. All my monitoring records. He knows exactly what we've discovered and how we discovered it. Martinez was already moving toward the operations center, speaking rapidly into her secure radio. This is Control 7. We have a blown operation and a potential hostile actor with full knowledge of investigative methods. Request immediate backup and containment protocols. Sarah followed Martinez into the operations center, where other agents were rapidly destroying sensitive documents and shutting down computer systems. The room buzzed with urgent activity as the team prepared for the possibility that their cover had been completely compromised. What happens now? Sarah asked. Martinez looked up from her radio communications. Now we find out if Anderson tries to run or if he decides to eliminate the threat we represent. Either way, Lieutenant Chen, your life just became much more dangerous. Outside, Sarah could hear vehicles approaching the building. She couldn't tell if they were reinforcements coming to help or Anderson arriving with forces loyal to him. In the space of an hour, her mission had transformed from gathering evidence to fighting for survival. The game of cat and mouse was over. Now it was time for the final confrontation that would determine whether a traitor escaped justice or whether Sarah and her team would pay the ultimate price for uncovering the truth. The vehicles outside belonged to Admiral Richardson and a team of Naval Criminal Investigative Service agents. Sarah felt relief wash over her as Martinez confirmed their identities through the security monitors. But her relief was short-lived when she saw Anderson arrive in a separate vehicle, accompanied by 3 military police officers. "He's making his move," Martinez whispered, as they watched Anderson approach the building. "He's going to try to arrest us before we can present our evidence." Admiral Richardson entered first, his face grim and determined. Anderson followed closely behind, his hand resting on his sidearm. The tension in the operations center was thick enough to cut with a knife as the two groups faced each other. "Lieutenant Chen," Admiral Richardson said, his voice carefully controlled. "Colonel Anderson has informed me that you've been conducting unauthorized surveillance of fleet personnel. He claims you've compromised operational security and may be involved in the intelligence leaks we've been investigating." Sarah felt the world spinning around her. Anderson was trying to frame her for his own crimes. She looked at Martinez, who gave an almost imperceptible nod, encouraging her to speak. "Sir, with respect, Colonel Anderson is the source of the intelligence leaks. I have documented evidence showing he's been transmitting classified information to hostile contacts in Singapore for over 8 months. Anderson stepped forward, his face showing perfectly crafted outrage. "Admiral, this is exactly the kind of paranoid accusation I was warning you about. Lieutenant Chen has been acting erratically for weeks, working excessive hours, showing signs of stress-induced delusions. I believe she's created this elaborate conspiracy theory to cover her own mistakes. It was a masterful performance." Anderson sounded reasonable, concerned, and completely believable. Sarah realized that he had been planning this confrontation, preparing to turn her own investigation against her if he was ever discovered. "Show me your evidence, Lieutenant," Admiral Richardson commanded. Sarah activated the main display screen and began presenting her findings. She showed the timeline of intelligence leaks, the communication patterns she had discovered, and the intercepted messages she had decoded. With each piece of evidence, Anderson's calm facade began to crack slightly. "This is fabricated," Anderson said. But his voice lacked the conviction it had carried moments before. "She's created false evidence to support her delusions." Admiral Richardson studied the display carefully, his experienced eyes analyzing the data patterns. "Colonel Anderson, these communication logs show your personal terminal accessing classified databases at times that correspond exactly with known intelligence leaks. How do you explain this correlation?" "I work late hours, Admiral. My job requires me to access classified information regularly. The timing is purely coincidental." Martinez stepped forward and handed Admiral Richardson a tablet. "Sir, this is the real-time intercept Lieutenant Chen captured last week. It shows Colonel Anderson transmitting the complete deployment schedule for Task Force 7 to a known intelligence collection point in Singapore." Admiral Richardson read the intercept data, his expression growing darker with each line. When he finished, he looked up at Anderson with the cold stare of a man who had been personally betrayed. "Colonel Anderson, you're under arrest for treason, espionage, and violation of your oath as an officer of the United States Navy." Anderson's careful composure finally shattered. His hand moved toward his weapon, but the NCIS agents were faster. Within seconds, he was disarmed and restrained, his career and life effectively over. "You have no idea what you've done." Anderson snarled at Sarah as the agents led him away. "The information I provided saved lives. You're all blind to the real threats facing this country." Sarah watched him go, feeling a mixture of relief and sadness. Anderson had been a respected officer for 20 years before becoming a traitor. Whatever had driven him to betray his country, she knew his actions had put countless American lives at risk. Admiral Richardson waited until Anderson was gone before turning to Sarah. "Lieutenant Chen, your investigation has prevented a catastrophic intelligence breach. The deployment information Anderson transmitted would have allowed enemy submarines to position themselves along our carrier group's route. You may have saved the lives of 5,000 sailors." The words should have made Sarah feel proud, but instead she felt exhausted and strangely empty. The adrenaline that had sustained her through weeks of investigation and the night's confrontation was wearing off, leaving her emotionally drained. "What happens to me now, sir?" she asked. "That depends on what you want, Lieutenant. Your work here has demonstrated exceptional ability and dedication. Agent Martinez's unit could use someone with your skills and discretion. But I must warn you that accepting would mean leaving your old life behind permanently. Sarah looked around the operations center, with its sophisticated equipment and air of constant vigilance. A few months ago, she had been content to remain invisible, monitoring routine communications and living a quiet military life. Now she had uncovered a treasonous conspiracy and helped prevent a potential military disaster. If I accept, would I be able to contact my family? She asked. Occasionally, under carefully controlled circumstances, but they would never know the true nature of your work. To them, you would simply be a military intelligence analyst working on classified projects. Sarah thought about her sister, who still believed she spent her days filing reports. She thought about her parents, who worried about her safety but had no idea how dangerous her new world had become. She thought about the colleagues who had watched in silence as she followed Admiral Richardson to his office, never suspecting that their invisible colleague would become a spy hunting traitors. I need some time to think about it, sir. Admiral Richardson nodded. Take as much time as you need, Lieutenant. But remember that some doors, once opened, can never be closed again. You've seen behind the curtain now. The question is whether you're willing to live permanently on the other side. 3 weeks later, Sarah stood in the communications center, pouring coffee from the same machine where her old life had ended. But everything had changed. She was no longer invisible. Officers nodded respectfully when she passed, knowing she had been instrumental in exposing Anderson's treachery, though they didn't know the details. Her official story was that she had discovered irregularities in communication logs during a routine security audit. Anderson had been court-martialed for mishandling classified information and sentenced to 20 years in military prison. The full extent of his espionage activities remained classified. Martinez approached her at the coffee machine, carrying a manila envelope similar to the one Admiral Richardson had given her weeks earlier. Your new assignment, Martinez said quietly. There's a situation developing in the South China Sea that requires someone with your particular skills. Sarah took the envelope, feeling its weight in her hands. Inside were orders that would take her to a new base, a new identity, and a new mission. She would continue to hunt spies and traitors, working in the shadows to protect secrets that could determine the outcome of wars. She thought about the choice Admiral Richardson had offered her. She could return to her old life, monitoring routine communications and remaining safely invisible. Or she could embrace the dangerous world of intelligence and counterintelligence, where the stakes were life and death, but where she could make a real difference. As she walked toward the exit, carrying her coffee and her new orders, Sarah realized she had already made her choice. The moment she heard Admiral Richardson call her name, her old life had ended. There was no going back to being the invisible lieutenant who poured coffee and monitored radio frequencies. She was Sarah Chen, intelligence officer and spy hunter. The quiet woman who had once wanted nothing more than to remain unnoticed had become someone who would spend her career in the shadows, protecting secrets that could save thousands of lives. At the door of the communications center, she turned back for one last look at her old workstation. The morning shift was beginning, and new officers were arriving for another routine day of monitoring communications and filing reports. They had no idea that one of their former colleagues had discovered a traitor in their midst and chosen a path that would change her life forever. Sarah stepped outside into the Pacific morning, carrying her coffee and her secrets, ready to disappear into the world of shadows